Welcome to Delenta Activate, the podcast that brings you insights and stories from executive coaches and changemakers in the leadership space. I'm your host, Dr.Naeema Pasha from Delenta, and I'm excited to share with you the latest trends, best practices, and innovations in coaching and leadership development. In this podcast, you'll hear from experts who successfully coach leaders and teams to achieve their goals and overcome challenges and transform their organizations. Whether you're a coach, a leader, or someone who wants to grow personally and professionally, this is the podcast for you. So tune in, get inspired, and activate your potential with Delenta Activate. Hi there, it's Dr.Naeema Pasha here, and I'm really pleased to be on the podcast today with Dr.Keisha Siriboe. I'm so excited. You're going to love this with her amazing energy and positivity. You'll be able to look at the beautiful plants and the books behind her, and hopefully you'll enjoy this conversation as well. And just before I ask you to go on, I just want to talk a little bit about Dr. Keisha. She's a TED speaker, educational consultant, and she just, if you watch some of her posts and things, she's one of the most positive, inspiring people I think you'll ever meet, because what she talks about is to strengthen and further enhance education's critical role in promoting inclusive growth, global competency, and the leadership development of others. And looking through her background, she's worked in several organizations, but she's also studied in some quite extraordinary places. Undergraduate at University of Nebraska, looking at cultural studies and family science, then moving on to the Beijing Normal University, doing her master's in education, MEd in international and comparative education, and then doing a doctorate at the University of Hong Kong in early childhood education and teaching. Wow, this is quite an incredible background. And I'm having to reduce that, otherwise we'll use the whole podcast talking about your amazing work, Dr. Keisha. So thank you so much for being here. It's a real pleasure. Just tell us how your morning is going. Let's just hear about that. Tell me how you are.
I've had a great morning. It's already started. Like, I've already been on 2 different continents. I had a meeting with a client in Hong Kong and another meeting with a client in the UK, right outside of London, right before I spoke with you all. So I am very grateful for the power of video conferencing.
Yeah. How did we do that before? How are we kind of moving to all this? We've adapted. In fact, I might ask you that as the first question before we go into a little bit more of the deeper stuff about, we've had this adaptation through the pandemic, both of us working in education. I worked previously properly in education, and we shifted, as the rest of the world did in education, in 2 weeks to online delivery. And if we wanted to do that in real life, it would have taken that 20 years, even a start. But here we are with this delivery, this hybrid form of delivery. What do you feel about it? What do you think has worked well and not so well?
Oh, thank you for giving me such a light question. It's been a space of really standing in the middle, because when the pandemic and everything first started, I was elated that we had some way to break the isolation. But I was terrified for all of the people we couldn't account for, because everybody wasn't on the Zoom call. And in terms of education, and it was a little, it was a little weird. It felt like I was in the Twilight Zone, because in my TED Talk in 2018, I specifically spoke on how nobody knows what education is going to look like. We are all making our best educated assumptions. And then the pandemic hit, and we lost track of students that are on the margins, that school was their only space of safety. And we also saw, for students who were well incubated, pods popped up immediately. Some schools never closed, but those were independent, well-funded private schools. Public schools had mandates. Even if they wanted to, they couldn't stay open. And so as I think about now, and I'm sure you're seeing this in the coaching space, a lot of the clients and a lot of the work that has come forward is a direct result of the ripple effect of everything that happened in the shadows of what we didn't capture, what we didn't see.
Yeah, that's so true. And do you think, because one of the pieces of work I did during the pandemic was a couple of things, was to look at how people engage and work and leadership and all this kind of thing. I found a paradox in that we were losing people, as you say, but also what we were finding, well, one of the pieces of research I found is that people felt there was a lot more equity because we were all these tiles on a screen. People were secretly getting taken to coffee to talk about a project. People weren't, oh, we'll see you at the golf club, or down the pub you would be in the UK, or these secret kind of what not secret, but these kind of social interactions that led to promotions. And people, what I found in the research is women, people of color, were finding, weirdly, they weren't expecting it, but a bit more equity was coming through from having this experience. I don't know what you found or you felt it
Well,
from.
that's the interesting juxtaposition, right?
Yeah.
Because if we move from the student space, which I was originally speaking to, and we
Yes.
go to the adult space, COVID had a completely different impact in terms of access, because a lot of conferences that were out of reach for academics, professionals, etc., all of a sudden we started seeing virtual options really take off. And I know I went to conferences that I would have never been able to afford, and because I had to pay for registration, flight, hotel, food, and all of that. Now all I had to pay was a sharply reduced registration fee. Or even then they started, like, because everybody was scrambling to cover their losses, there was a lot more access, in some cases absolutely free. And so I was really amazed at how academia found out that it can widen its gate of access, how a lot of communities popped up, people that you wouldn't usually have access to. You could have a direct conversation with them on the Zoom and like ask a question to them directly. And I think that energy is still with us today. But I was amazed, and this was the thing that got me, since we're on education,
Yeah.
how quickly all these standardized tests we claimed we couldn't do without, we
Yeah.
found ways to forego them all of a sudden.
Yeah. Yes.
Uh-huh.
I know, I was thinking that as well. And also, when we look into how people progress and standard tests in education, then the standard test too that employers use for recruiting as well, also going low. So just sticking with education, I want to come to you. I love the things you've done. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more how you moved. You were studying at Nebraska, then you went to Beijing, and then you did Hong Kong, and then you worked in the OECD in Paris. And so just tell me about this international experience, how it came about, what it gave you. I'd love to know a little bit more about that.
No, thank you for asking. So it's actually tied into a series I'm doing right now called Winning Wounded. Everything you mentioned is a great example of my wins, right? It's the sexy part
Yeah.
of the journey. But a lot of the things that motivated were my wounds, that motivated that desire to push past what limitations were put in front of me, or what relational wounds or family wounds were there, and made me open to exploring different countries, made me unafraid to go to a different continent, because I wasn't tightly anchored to a family structure. And as I got out into the world and I started seeing amazing bonds and all of these things, like Asian societies never cease to amaze me with how tightly knit those families can be. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they're perfect, but I am amazed at how well people in those families are taken care of for the most part, and how grandparents and family and everyone is invested in the family unit. And that propelled my studies. When I got to my master's and I started really looking at parent-child bonds, and why I invested so heavily in promoting early childhood literacy and reading aloud, because of what it can do for the bonding, that was a win. But it was rooted in a wound of what I myself never experienced. And somehow, some way, people saw my desire to be effective in this space and started giving me opportunities, or I put myself forward. because I felt like I had nothing to lose. And I was in this space, and I'll also just be very transparent because a lot of the racism I experienced in the United States, when I got into a space where racism couldn't lock me out of opportunities, don't get me wrong, it weighed me down, but it didn't stop me from entering into the space. There was no way I wasn't going to pursue it, because in my own space, I would be completely locked out of it. And so that propelled a lot of, I think, my initiative and my drive, and why I went from height to height to height to the highest height of global education policy within the OECD, and
Mm,
establishing their student focus group and really connecting with other ministries and
mm,
seeing that anything was possible. And now that I have my own coaching and consulting company, all of that momentum has just furthered my resolve to be just as effective back in the United States, even though I still work globally.
mm,
I've taken all of that and grounded myself, like Brene Brown talks
mm.
about, grounding yourself in confidence after you've rumbled with vulnerability. I am definitely experiencing that.
Wow, that's something quite profound. So my work I've done is a lot around career, how we find ourselves, our
Mm,
identity, and all that kind of thing.
mm,
But one of the people I used to read about, he's based in Chicago, Mark Savikas. He's a vocational psychologist, and
mm,
he talks about it. Just essentially, what you said reminded me of him, because he talks about these early experiences that we have and how they shape our career choices. No,
mm,
no
mm,
surprise there. But
mhm,
what he talks about in particular is this psychodynamic approach, perhaps, of, these early careers, particularly if they've been fearful, if they've
mm.
been something quite difficult, fearful, deep, challenging that we've had. What he suggests is that we've got to try uncover that. We try and resolve it. It's the fear that drives us to create better. And you just, in a sense, talked about that's what we're trying to do. And I recognize that in myself as well. But part of me wants to say, you don't need to have these fears to try and resolve and move forward. I'm going to ask you, Dr. Kish, do we have to go through these things in order to get to these highest mountains? Because you have done so. You've
Mm.
reached these higher mountains, as you said, through the wound.
Thank you for this. And I love the way the conversation is naturally unfolding. I want to gently push back against the word fear, though,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't feel fear motivated me. If anything, I think I closely align with the understanding of post traumatic growth.
Right.
And while I don't wish for anyone to have trauma be your motivating factor, I
Mm.
do find it wildly encouraging that for people who have been saturated in trauma, because we don't always
Yeah.
choose what trauma looks like. And I also think it's important, because we're both academics, we have to have a shared vocabulary, right? So as I say trauma, I am referring to Resmaa Menakem's definition, where he simplifies it as saying trauma is anything the body and the mind perceive as too fast, too soon, too much,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And so we don't always get to choose when that happens. I think anyone who walked through COVID or walked through 2020 to now had some level of trauma, right? Now, do I wish that upon anyone? Absolutely not. But I do not want people to think that that's where their story
Mm.
ends, which
Mm.
is why I'm so passionate about winning wounded. Nor do I feel that it's necessary for folks to believe that this is what it takes in order to be successful. I must have some hard story. I see this with my work in consulting and coaching when I'm dealing with people who represent as white or who are seen as white identified. They are often quiet in diverse groups because they believe they don't have the right to speak, or they feel like because I haven't suffered as much, I can't contribute to this conversation. But I have found in my group coaching settings that when we all allow ourselves to enter the arena and rumble with these things from our various vantage points, that's where our most profound insights happen. That's where our most profound connections happen. That's where our most profound understandings of how to move forward occur. And so I don't think that there's only one way to reach that high level of understanding, which is probably why we're coaches or we're connected to coaching, because connecting with another individual who can help you unlock these things within yourselves is another way to reach that level of purpose and alignment that I am firmly rooted in.
Mm. You describe some incredible complexities, but motivations, I think, for us as human beings to progress. And what's struck me quite deeply is what you said when we go into these spaces, because like you also worked in diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I'm going to share again, has been one of the most challenging experiences. I was not expecting this level of
That's when the tea comes out.
the tea came out quite a lot. Tea and tears, I'd say, from me anyway. And I was interested in what you say, because at the moment, as we're recording, the world is in some turmoil, which obviously it always is, but I'm just talking about the turmoil, the polarization that we've got in thinking where people are. And you've talked about this. What we need to do is to get to this space where we're allowing other people to speak and be heard, whatever their particular background. That I know is quite a challenging statement, because some people are saying, actually, my experience has to be heard more and louder because of what I've been through. I mean, not to go into the politics of things or the religions, race, and all the things we want to do in specifically, but how do we do that? I mean, if we can get around the table and speak and feel that everybody can have a part in this, then we can achieve. But how can you do that? Tell me a little bit about how you did that.
No, thank you. Well, a lot of what I'm saying is rooted in trainings and certifications that I have invested in. I think I've spent a close amount in terms of what I've spent on my degrees in my certifications. In fact, I'm in 2 more certifications right now, because just as we are with our academics, you have to stay on the cutting edge of this work. And so a lot of my understanding of racial trauma and racial literacy has come from Dr. Howard C. Stevenson's work out of Penn University. And he has taught me to understand racism or racial trauma as a public health issue. And so that's where my leaning into somatic therapies and mindfulness and wellness and all of the research and things that I've done with the Trauma Research Foundation and Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's work have come into alignment with that understanding. So when we first talk about this metaphorical table, we have to make sure that the seats people sit down in are rooted in the understanding that the mind and the body experience trauma. And the table has to be the shared experience of the body. And then from there, whatever we serve, whatever topics we begin to see as the plates or the food or the entrees, that's when we start talking about our experiences. And from that lens, the racial charge, as Resma Menakem has taught me, that is felt by everybody.
Right.
And so teaching people to recognize that the mind is a tricky place. It's a place that compartmentalizes. It's a place that divides. But the body is a shared experience. That is how I navigate that. And y'all may come for me, but that's fine. I can handle it. I don't agree with the statement of my story is more important than yours, that only I get to speak. I disagree with that flat-footed, simply because we are all experiencing this. And if you're telling me that I must be quiet and that I can't share, then you're telling me that I have to hold my pain, my trauma, and my story is not worthy because we're going back to the Suffer Olympics. I have not suffered enough. I've always been held quiet. You are standing into what Paulo Freire talks about in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. You are now the oppressor and the oppressed. When you have these clear-cut moments of no one can speak or only I can share my story, or you have to look a certain way, right? And you go tell your story in an affinity group. No disrespect to affinity groups, but we have to be willing to, again, like Brene Brown said, rumble with vulnerability. I'm not saying this is a you go first, you go second. type thing. I'm saying we got to be willing to sit with the hard things and figure out, how can this be two things at once? How can we do this and that versus this or that? And that's not always the easy answer, but that's why we need to be grounded in the body and the human experience so we can discuss these things at the table until we reach a shared understanding. And I've done that quite successfully with the schools that I consult, with the clients that I work with, because my clients are all shades and all experiences. And when I was first put in a space to coach women who represent as white, that's when I began to understand why it's so important to understand and rumble with these things, because we will never get anywhere if my ancestral story is the only one that is present when I'm trying to coach or consult you.
That is very, very powerful. And I think it's actually quite transformative, what you said. It is quite transformative. And as you said, people come at you, people might disagree. And you just saying that, know that this is a transformative statements that you're putting forward. And I wonder there, just if I was thinking for myself, for other people in this field, when we go into that pain, when we've been attacked for the route we're taking, when we write something, when we present something, when we coach something, or we're trying to make some changes about equity and all these kind of things, or stop discrimination. If we're in that space and we feel attacked, and you talk about, the Brené Brown work about rumbling with vulnerability, talk me through how can we push ourselves through these really rocky paths? Because that, as we just talked about, the tea and the tears, that's what I've had several times. And I thought, when people have been abusive really about doing, working in this field, can you give me and others listening to podcasts advice about how we go into that, able to rumble with vulnerability, if you can shine a light on that for us?
Sure. From a diversity, inclusion, belonging lens?
Yes, please. Yeah.
I say this with love to anyone watching this who is courageous enough to be in this space. You must be kind and gentle with yourself. Before any and everything, you must put your mental health, your physical well-being first. And if that means stepping back from the space, I have been in group coaching sessions where someone who represented as a white male started attacking me. And I stood my ground. I didn't allow myself to be triggered into a stereotype of angry Black woman. I did not allow this individual to be successful in their repeated attempts to interrupt me and not allow me to speak. But when I finished speaking in this public space, in this paid professional environment, I said this clearly. I am going to step back, cut my camera off, and take time to regulate my emotions, because I cannot believe I just had to fight for the right to finish speaking. And I cut my camera off. I muted my mic. We were on a Zoom. I let the other facilitators around me know that someone needs to step in, because I was putting my self-care first. If we talk about trauma, then we must talk about conditioning. Because the brain and the body are designed to survive. And so when you have come through racial attacks like that, very rarely is it your first time. And if it is your first time, then you're just going to go quickly into survival mode, which is fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or appease, right? And so there's a lot going on within you. And so that ability to recognize that I am not going to allow the conditioning of what racism has done, which says just be productive, just move with urgency, serve at the expense of everyone else, and allow me to continue limping forward. I'm going to stop, regulate my emotions, come back into my window of tolerance if I've gone into hyperarousal, or protect myself from going into hypoarousal and disassociating or disconnecting entirely. I'm going to get myself in my window of tolerance. And I do that through breath work. I do that through various somatic exercises. If you want to know more, hire me as a coach and I'll walk you through all of that. but it's that ability to get still, to know that I am worthy of taking up space. So if people are waiting on me, I'm okay with that. And then I'll come back into the space, and that could be 5 minutes later. In that situation, I think I came back 10 minutes later. And then because I was in a space where I had regulated, I honestly shared, thank you for giving me that space. I had to tend to my own self-care, because I cannot be an effective leader if I don't practice what it is that I'm teaching. And I was surprised, but somehow that resulted in people buying in or being more engaged or taking the content more seriously because they saw it happen in real life. And that is my humble response to a very deep question. But one of the things we must do before we take care of anybody else is make sure our own oxygen mask is securely in place and we're breathing before we think about everybody else, because this work is heavy. And if you don't learn how to pick it up and put it back down, it will suffocate you.
I think people listening to this, Dr. Keisha, will be so profoundly grateful for those words. I certainly am. Just to learn and listen and absorb the words, not just the words, about what you're saying, in order to self-care. In a way, it feels like self-protection in order to progress through this. Thank you so much. And just moving it from this space, and you're working so much in education and development, what are the key things that you're noticing that is important at the moment to enable young people, children, to develop ways to thrive?
You asked the best questions.
Oh,
Ask the best questions. And I say that because I just got back from working with a school, a Chinese language immersion school in San Francisco. And I have supported that school for 3 years. And it's a preschool through middle school, school. And there were so many highlights. But one of the things that brings me joy every time I think about it, because of my research and my work in reading aloud, I was able to do a lot of reading aloud within my other consulting work. And I did a reading aloud with the preschool 2, which are kids 2 to 3 years old. And I read the book Namaste. And it is a book about the word namaste, and it's written from a South Asian perspective, and you have all this diversity. It's a very simple story, but each time I said the word namaste, I taught the children to do a breathwork exercise, and it was smell the flowers, blow out the candle. And every time I read the word namaste, I had them do that exercise. And I had a classroom of 2, 3-year-olds doing breath work. Every time I said the word namaste, and one of the kids, I saw them like close their eyes. I saw them, connecting with their bodies. And that brings me so much joy, because if children who are growing up in these wildly uncertain times, who have to deal with exercises about possible school shootings, and the exercises we're teaching right now in the States are flight, hide, or fight. Right. 3 options. Run if you can, hide well if you can't, be prepared to fight for your life. That's the drill.
Yeah. It's hard to even,
Yes, that is the drill that we're giving. And I was amazed and appalled that there was no breath work, no emotional regulation. After these drills occur, you go back, you might have like a conversation around it, but it's not in the manual the way all of this other language is. It's literally in the businesses I've consulted are like, you cannot do this as is. And so teaching children to regulate their emotions, calm their nervous systems, because the gun violence is one example, but test anxiety, competitiveness, all the things that they're dealing with, the growing use of AI, all of this. So, and the increasing pressure that youth are facing. I'm not even talking about social media, but there's so many things that are attacking their sense of self, that are attacking their understanding of how to be in harmony or peace with your body. And a lot of these activities, I saw this in the school I love and support. Yoga, mindfulness, all of these things are options in the after school programs that they offer. They are the most underutilized programs because parents are putting them in coding, they're putting them in STEM, they're putting them in engineering, they're thinking about what's going to make you successful in life, and they're forgetting what is needed to sustain any of that.
To sustain success, to sustain, as you talk about mental health as well. One of the things when I was looking through the work you've done was about reading out loud and why it's important. And I wondered if you could talk about maybe we need to do that as adults as well, to other adults in the workplace. I wonder if you could just talk to me a little bit more about reading aloud, telling stories.
Yes, and you just keep plugging my business, so thank you. Like,
I'm
ask
so
me
happy.
all the
I'm so
questions.
happy Delenta can plug your business.
Because in my consulting work, I offer bibliotherapy, which is the adult version of reading aloud, but it is the use of stories as a entry point for difficult conversations. And I've used it in my DEI work. I've used it in gun violence work. I've used it in talking about trauma. And I am literally reading a curated, well, first I have to do research with the organization that hires me to find out, where is the pain point. And then I curate a read aloud story that then serves as the entry point. It's a metaphor for a lot of things that are going on. And there's a wide selection of stories I can choose from. But if I pulled from one recent example, some people may be familiar with the story of the little red hen. It's a well-known story about, a hen says, if you'll help me grow the grain or grow the wheat, you can have some of the bread. And through the course of growing the wheat, nobody helps her, and she has to do it all her own. And then at the end, the friends, they smell the bread baking, they want some of the bread. And she says, no, because you didn't help me, you can't have any. I found a alternative retelling of that story that expanded the plot a little bit. And I used it as a way to talk about how we deal with burnout in, like, 'cause I was hired for a state level organization, how burnout shows up, what it looks like when we ask for help with projects and no one helps, what it looks like when people are given help and support, but we're not given that support and we're supposed to bake bread on our own and then be willing to share that bread with the people who didn't help. And so it just created this fascinating space of conversation. And what I love about bibliotherapy is that when done correctly, people take the narrative and they use it to mirror their own experiences without you even asking.
There's something, isn't there? It's just what you're saying about the narrative, but is there something that we could learn about the process as well? Is that something that we could put that in with younger people as well, school children, university? Maybe is there something there about how we can pull these narratives and talk, which when you mentioned AI, because this is going to be, we're going to get ChatGPT to write these things for us, the stories and things, but coming out of our own mouths is still going to be us, isn't it? We need to do that. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I love stories. And the reason why I leverage stories across all age levels is because I found stories to be one of the few places of communication where you can't call someone a liar. Because my story of experience is my story of experience. And what I love in terms of stories when I'm working with children, and this is what I taught the individuals at my school, is that stories can be a place of building confidence, because this is also a space where nobody's answer is wrong. Because if we're reading a fiction story, then there's room for all sorts of interpretations and imaginings. And for that child who's gotten a lot of things wrong today, who's having a hard time, who's neurally diverse, the ability to read a story aloud and let them participate in answering a question and then showering them with praise because they got it right, or bringing them in to the collective experience of answering a question within their group and being validated. And so on all of those levels in the university space, that's where I find it to be so fascinating, because just like middle school, you have all these budding understandings of who I am in the world and how I think I need to be seen. And so when you tell a narrative, you allow both things to be true at once. It is a space where everyone can enter. It is a space where the story, for the most part, can be told without harsh judgment or someone saying that's a lie. It is a space where people can be affirmed who may be deeply insecure.
That's fantastic. And I remember, I mean, I think I was late to storytelling, the whole idea of it in terms of bringing it in or reconnecting it from my childhood. I learned about it more recently when I was doing my doctorate, because one of the lecturers had moved from the UK. He's originally from the States to Norway. So we had to go there for our week to learn in Norway. So then I learned about Nordic peoples, you know, because of the lights, and there's times when it's very dark nights during the winter, that people develop this sort of storytelling as part of the culture. And then I was suddenly immersed into that, and I thought, wow, this is quite powerful. So I learned it quite late, but you know, I learned it when I learned it. Think I'm going to plug again and a few more things if I can. Dr. Keisha Cares, I wanted to ask you, as we're sort of drawing the podcast to a close, the final piece that you're working on, which I was really excited to look at, provocations to greatness. And you say, and I wanted you to comment on this piece, because you say, remember, greatness is not achieved by avoiding provocation, but by embracing them as opportunities for growth and transformation. We touched about that in the beginning, but I wonder if you could come back and revisit that in the context of this, and also tell us about what you'll be doing.
Again, with the great questions. In about 45 minutes, I'm going to step into a provocation to greatness when I launch my Winning Wounded web series on Instagram. And I'm going to go live for 10 minutes. And I have some questions that people have sent in, because I've been sending out emails to people on my wait list. And if you're interested in it, just follow me on Instagram at Dr.Keisha Cares, right? I am being provoked to talk about navigating difficult family relationships during the holidays. That is a provocation. The greatness that is already coming forward is the people who are wounded in these areas that want to know, how do I deal with the manipulation of my family? And if you are successful, sometimes that is the warmest place to hide in terms of the unhealed things that we still carry. And so the greatness is often the reflection of what other people see. In this moment, on this day, it is simply me being willing to push past my fear of talking about things that are often kept in secret. It is my nervousness about, will I say the wrong thing? But deep in my soul and in my being, there's this unshakable resolve that this must be said, that these skills must be given, that I am ready with all of my training, with all of my certifications, with all of my skill to speak to the deepest wounds that we carry and pretend that we're okay in our, pursuit of greatness or in our pursuit of wins. What does it look like when we win wounded? And that's really where I'm at. And that's where so much of my work is going, because I've understood that some of these wounds aren't going to heal the way we want them to. Some of us aren't going to get the happily ever after with that family member. That is a wound. But the win within the wound is finding our ability to be okay with that and love them in a safe way, but most importantly, love ourselves more. And in having the audacity to speak to parental wounds, things that happen with our mothers and our fathers, I am provoking myself to an unknown level of greatness. And I have no idea what's going to come out of that. But I am writing a book. I will start that process at the end of the month. And I have my therapist and I have my team around me as I sit with some of my own wounds and analyze them and begin to really look at how did I make peace with difficult and sometimes non-existent relationships with my mother and father. All of the things that I've described in terms of my successes that you so generously listed in the beginning came out of my wounds. I did it in complete isolation. First African American to get my degrees from University of Hong Kong and Beijing Normal University. There were so many wounds, and there wasn't family to fall back on. It was faith and, a few core friends. There were wins within those wounds, but that didn't diminish the fact that those wounds were there. But I have learned, and I am still learning, how to win wounded. And that is a message I now feel compelled at this level of my career to start sharing with others.
Dr. Keisha Siriboe, I am so honored to have been part of this podcast. I feel like one of your plants behind you and around you. I feel watered. I feel sun has come on me. I feel like when I'm leaning to one side, you've put something that I can stick into the ground that I can lean on. And it's been incredibly profound. Your story, what you have to share. I'm enormously grateful. I think everybody listening to this will have gained so much insight and almost a torch. Let's call it a story that we can start writing for ourselves to progress ourselves. And we don't know the end. You're writing it. You're going to be writing your book as well. We don't know the end of that yet, but we can all aspire to greatness with the wounds that we have. Thank you so much, Dr. Keisha. It's been an incredible experience.
Thank you for having me.
At all. Thank you. I think Delenta is delighted to have you as part of the family. Thanks so much.